Welcome to Morbid Outdoors, the podcast that ventures deep into the shadows of the wild. Here, we unravel the mysteries of missing persons, explore spine chilling legends, and share the most morbid stories that nature has to offer. From the depths of the dense forests to the highest mountain peaks, we'll uncover the secrets that lie hidden in the great outdoors. Join us as we navigate the eerie, the unexplained, and the terrifying. So if you dare, grab your gear and let's embark on a journey into the unknown. This is Morbid Outdoors. Hello, everyone. I am Elise and I'm your host. And today we're doing something a little different. We are doing May, June, and July nature news. So these are just things that happened out in nature that I took note of the past 3 months. So welcome back. Um, we usually do a nature news every month, but this summer that has felt a little overwhelming for me. So we are going to do all 3 months of the summer in this one episode. Now, honestly, I didn't get as many articles as I would have liked. I think last summer had a bunch more like incidents. And it's a good thing, right? That people are not that bad things aren't happening as much. That's how it feels, at least to me. You might feel differently, but just from what I was looking at, it doesn't seem like it's been a very eventful summer. But we do have some nature news. So as always, these stories aren't meant to scare you away from exploring. It's quite the opposite. It's reminders that the outdoors deserve our respect and the wilderness and nature doesn't care how experienced you are, how many miles you've hiked, or how many times you've visited a park before, because anything can happen on any given day. So let's start with a rescue. Now, when people imagine a bear attack, they often picture something that happens deep in the Alaskan backcountry or hundreds of miles away from civilization. But a story unfolded just a few miles from one of the busiest attractions in Yellowstone National Park. On May 4th, two hikers were attacked by a grizzly bear while hiking near Mystic Falls, not far from Old Faithful. It was the first grizzly attack causing injuries in Yellowstone this year. Now, I have actually hiked this trail. It's a very beautiful trail. And when I hiked it, because you're going through woods and forest, I was hiking with my bear spray, holding it in my hand, like finger on the trigger. Like, no joke. This is grizzly country. Now, a man from Maryland named Craig Lerman was also hiking Mystic Falls Trail that afternoon. It was a beautiful spring day in Yellowstone, and like so many visitors, he was just simply out taking a stroll, enjoying all of Yellowstone's beauty. But as he walked, something caught his attention. He saw fresh grizzly tracks in the mud. And seeing bear tracks isn't necessarily unusual in Yellowstone, especially during spring when, the bears are reemerging from hibernation. But still, the tracks were enough to spook him to pay closer attention to where he was going, what he was looking at, and anything he was hearing. And then further along the trail, he saw something much more alarming. He saw a bloody hat lying in the middle of the trail, and attached to it was a watch that had been completely ripped off. And at that moment, Craig knew that something terrible had happened, and he was likely the first person, to stumble across this bear attack. So he continued cautiously up the trail. Then he heard a voice calling for help. And at first, Craig later admitted that he thought this might have been a joke at first, maybe teenagers playing around or someone trying to scare hikers. But the closer that he got, the more obvious it became that this wasn't a prank. Because lying ahead of him was a 28-year-old man who had been mauled by a grizzly bear. According to Craig, the injuries were horrific. The victim had deep lacerations across his face, back, stomach, and legs. There was blood everywhere, and pieces of flesh were visible near where the victim was lying. Despite his injuries, this man had managed to call 911 for himself on a blood covered cell phone before collapsing. Now, Craig immediately he took over the emergency call and he relayed their location to dispatch while trying to comfort this guy until help arrived. There was a second injured hiker located nearby, and both victims belonged to the same church group and were transported to the Eastern Idaho Regional Medical Center for treatment. And good news, they both survived the attack. So, one detail that stood out to investigators after the fact and to Craig was that there was a possibility that there was more than one bear involved in this attack. Because while waiting for rescuers, Craig noticed two distinct sets of bear tracks in the muddy trail, and one set of tracks appeared much larger than the other. So he suspected that there had been an adult grizzly that was accompanied by a younger bear. Now, park officials hadn't confirmed exactly what happened during the encounter, but spring is usually a sensitive time to be hiking in grizzly country because mothers are traveling with their young babies, food sources are still limited at this time of year, and bears are covering huge distances looking for anything and everything they can eat. So, even experienced hikers can accidentally surprise one at close range. Now, the National Park Service, they did temporarily close portions of the trail while wildlife biologists investigated the scene and evaluated the bear activity. And for me, one of the most striking parts of this story isn't the attack, it's Craig Lerman. Because imagine hiking through Yellowstone, expecting waterfalls and maybe a little snow, only to stumble across a bloody hat. And then hear someone begging for help. I think a lot of people probably would have panicked. I know that I would have panicked. Um, you don't know what you're going to do in a situation like that until you're in it. But Craig was brave and he kept moving towards possible danger to help out a fellow hiker. And because of his quick thinking, and because the injured hiker had managed to make the initial emergency call, both of the victims survived. Now, it's an incredible reminder that sometimes the people who make the biggest differences aren't the rangers or the first responders. They're simply the other hikers that are on this trail that take action. And this is also another reminder that bear spray should never ever ever be in your backpack for just in case. It needs to be immediately accessible, and you need to know how to use it before an emergency happens. Like I said, smart hikers, when hiking in grizzly country, will have their bear spray in their hand, uncapped, finger on the trigger, ready. And it's not so bear spray isn't like just to spray when you see a bear. It is a last resort to use if a bear is actively charging you. So, this bear attack story is sad. I'm glad they survived, and I'm really glad that someone like Craig is the one who found them and helped until, first responders could get there. That is out of Yellowstone. Our second one, just days after the Yellowstone attack, another bear story dominated the headlines, except this time the outcome was not as good. Now, 33-year-old Anthony Polio, I think I'm saying his name right, of Davie, Florida, he had been traveling to Glacier National Park to experience one of America's most spectacular wilderness areas. Glacier National Park is amazing. Now, Anthony planned to hike the Mount Brown Trail toward the historic Mount Brown Fire Lookout. And before leaving for his hike, he did let others know where he intended to go, which is something that you should always do when hiking alone. And this, safety precaution that he took later became crucial to search efforts. Now, when Anthony failed to return, his family members reported him missing, and the search was on. Teams from Glacier National Park worked alongside Flathead County Search and Rescue, Montana Fish, Parks and Wildlife, the Montana Army National Guard, and a ton of other agencies. Helicopters searched from above while ground crews combed the rugged terrain. Searchers eventually located some of Anthony's belongings about 2.5 miles up on the Mount Brown Trail. That discovery narrowed the search area, and unfortunately, heartbreaking news followed. His body was found 50 feet off of the trail in a densely wooded area filled with downed timber. An investigator said his injuries were consistent with a bear encounter. Now, officials investigating believed that it was a surprise on accident. He might have been hiking and scared a bear on accident and it reacted and it mauled him. Now, in bear country, surprise encounters are among the most dangerous situations imaginable because neither the bear nor the hiker has time to react calmly. Everything happens within split seconds. And there was early evidence that was there that suggested that there had been very little opportunity for Anthony or the bear to avoid one another, which is really, really unfortunate. Now, following the discovery of his remains, the affected section of the Mount Brown Trail was closed while biologists monitored bear activity and determined if there were any additional public safety measures that needed to be instituted. This death marked Glacier National Park first fatal bear attack since 1998. Which is honestly crazy. I mean, there are a lot of bear attacks in Glacier, but not all of them are always fatal, but this was the first one since 1998. And stories like this are always difficult to cover because it reminds us that, I mean, you can do everything right and things can still happen and you can still perish outside. And that's something that I always think about when I go outside. And it's not a fun thought, but it helps keep me safer. Or at least it feels like it helps keep me safer. Now, it's good that Anthony reportedly told others where he was hiking because search teams knew exactly where to begin. That information that he gave undoubtedly shortened the search. It's something that I often repeat on Morbid Outdoors and in life because I think it matters so much. You always have to tell someone where you're going, like exactly where you're going, not just the park, not just the trail. You need to tell them your planned route and when you expect to return because it can make all of the difference if something goes wrong. Now, on a brighter note, let's shift stories to Death Valley National Park because I don't know if you know this or not. I know I've said it before on the show. There is a very rare fish that inhabits Death Valley National Park, and it's inside Devil's Hole, which is a narrow limestone cavern, and it's one of the rarest fish on Earth. It's called the devil's hole pupfish, and these are little fish that are so blue, and they're only about an inch long, and they live nowhere else on the planet. Their entire global population exists inside this single water-filled cavern, in Death Valley National Park, which makes them incredibly vulnerable to environmental changes. And for years, scientists have feared that, these little pupfish might disappear forever. Population counts dropped to a frighteningly, no, frighteningly, I cannot talk today, for low numbers, okay? And at one point, fewer than 40 fish remained. So biologists and scientists weren't sure whether the species could ever recover, but this spring brought some encouraging news. Recent surveys recorded one of the strongest population rebounds in years, which gave conservationists renewed hope that this little tiny fish may have a fighting chance after all. Researchers and scientists credit decades of habitat protection, intensive monitoring, and careful management. Like, you cannot go see these fish, they've got it all fenced off for good reason. Now, the fish's shallow spawning shelf, where eggs are laid, remains one of the most closely protected habitats in the national park system. There's actually a really interesting true crime, or it's not true crime, but like mysterious disappearance story that happened here that I cannot remember if I covered. Maybe I should though. So they have it very locked down. You people used to go scuba diving in here, and that has since been shut down. It is not safe for people or the pupfish. So, despite all the odds stacked against these little devil's hole pupfish, they are continuing to hang on. Next, we're going to Grand Canyon National Park. Now, every summer, there are a ton of headlines for heat related emergencies at Grand Canyon. Despite warning signs, ranger advisories, and years of public education campaigns, visitors just keep continuing to underestimate how dangerous the canyon can become. And this year, one of those tragedies involved someone incredibly young. A 16-year-old boy from Alvarado, Texas, died while hiking the Bright Angel Trail with members of his family during extreme heat. The family had been attempting to hike from the South Rim towards Phantom Ranch when the teenager began showing signs of severe heat illness near the 3 Mile Rest House. Park officials said that temperatures in the inner canyon had climbed well over 100 degrees, and despite emergency medical care, this teen could not be saved. A helicopter and the National Park Service medical personnel responded, but unfortunately, he was pronounced dead after resuscitation efforts failed. Authorities later confirmed the preliminary cause appeared to be heat related illness, though an official investigation continued. Now, every year, rangers remind visitors that hiking into the canyon is optional. Hiking back out is mandatory. It's a phrase you've probably heard before if you've ever visited the Grand Canyon, but it's repeated because people continue to underestimate the climb. The Bright Angel Trail descends gradually, which makes it feel deceptively easy, but gravity's doing the most work on the way down. And eventually, you have to turn around, and now you're climbing thousands of feet back uphill. So the deeper you go, the hotter it gets. And many visitors begin their hike on the south rim, where temperatures might feel perfectly comfortable, like maybe even cool. But after a few hours of hiking, they're hiking through the desert heat that's 20 to 30 degrees warmer. Their bodies are working harder, your water disappears faster, and even if you're drinking consistently, you can still lose electrolytes faster than you're replacing them. That's why salty snacks are key when hiking. And that is when heat exhaustion can eventually become heat stroke. Now, the National Park Service has spent years encouraging hikers to avoid attempting long canyon hikes during the hottest parts of the day, especially during late spring and summer. Um, when you're visiting the desert, you should begin before sunrise. Always carry far more water than you think you'll need. Eat regularly, and you should be able to recognize the early warning signs of heat illness, which are headache, dizziness, nausea, confusion, and the inability to cool down. And unfortunately, once someone progresses to heat stroke, it becomes truly a medical emergency. Now, this tragedy is heartbreaking because it reminds us that national parks don't become dangerous only because of wildlife or cliffs. Sometimes it's just the weather. And unlike storms or floods, heat doesn't always feel dangerous until it's too late. It really can sneak up on you. So I say this a lot. I would never hike in the desert in the summer, only in the winter. And if I was hiking in the summer, I'm getting up at 4 or 5 AM to do the hike because it gets too hot and it becomes like a creeping it just creeps up on you and you really don't know until it's too late. Now, our next story begins nearly 3 decades ago. Because in July of 2000, a researcher working in a remote section of Olympic National Park made a discovery that no one ever expects or hopes to find. Hidden near the Solduke River drainage was a weathered tent, and inside the tent was a sleeping bag. And inside the sleeping bag were human skeletal remains. Investigators recovered everything they could from the campsite. There were binoculars, a JanSport day pack, a shoulder bag, a folding saw, winter clothing, a blanket, camping equipment. But there was one thing that they couldn't recover, and that was the identity of this person. Now, medical examiners estimated that the person was likely a man between 30 and 50 years old who had died anywhere from several months to several years before he was found. Investigators tried everything available at the time. Fingerprints were not able to be recovered. There were no identification documents, like no obvious clues pointing investigators towards family members. And eventually the case went cold, as we would expect it to. And for 26 years, this man remained John Doe. someone's son, maybe someone's brother, perhaps someone's friend, but officially he had no identity. And that finally changed this June because thanks to advances in forensic genetic genealogy, investigators partnered with the King County Medical Examiner's Office and a forensic laboratory Othram to extract a DNA profile from the remains. Relatives located across several states submitted comparison samples, ultimately confirming the man's identity as Joseph Louis Serrao Jr., who was born in Hawaii and had last been in contact with his family in 1998 while living in Washington. Now, think about that. For nearly 3 decades, his family had no idea what happened. Did he leave voluntarily? Did he just start a new life? Was he even still alive somewhere? Now, while the answers may still be incomplete, they at least know where he ended up. National Park Service officials said that they hoped that the identification would finally bring his loved ones some measure of closure after so many years of uncertainty. Now, this is something I love to see is that we have this technology now and it is being used for so much good, especially the forensic genealogy. It continues to change missing persons investigations, murder investigations, rape investigations. And we're getting so many answers that for the past few decades have seemed almost impossible to get. So I love that someone kept preserving this evidence, that someone kept revisiting the old files, and that someone believed that technology would eventually catch up. And in Joseph's case, it finally did. It gave him back his name, and it doesn't erase what happened to him, but it restored something incredibly important. It restored Joseph's identity. And for the people that loved him, that's everything. And we have another hopeful story out of Washington. Now, if you've ever seen photographs of the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, which I'm assuming you have, you've seen one of the most dramatic natural disasters in modern American history. This eruption flattened forests, it buried rivers, it destroyed so much habitat, and it wiped out salmon spawning grounds that had existed for thousands of years. And for decades, biologists wondered whether the Chinook salmon would ever return to the upper watershed. And this June, they finally did after so many years. For the first time since the eruption, Chinook salmon were released into the upper North Fork watershed above Mount St. Helens as a part of a massive restoration effort led by the Cowlitz Indian tribe and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and numerous conservation partners. The return marks the beginning of restoring a run that disappeared when Mount St. Helens reshaped the entire landscape in 1980. Now, to some people, releasing fish into a river may not sound exciting or like this should be news. But this is actually much bigger than that. Chinook salmon, also known as king salmon, they actually once migrated through these waters for thousands of years before the eruption completely severed their access to their historic spawning habitat. So, for nearly half a century, that migration wasn't happening, it stopped. And now scientists hope that these salmon will once again reestablish their populations, connecting an ecological relationship that existed long before humans were keeping records. Salmon just don't benefit anglers. They're one of the foundation species of the Pacific Northwest ecosystems. So when salmon return, they feed a lot of things. They feed bears, eagles, otters, coyotes, and even the surrounding forest benefits as nutrients from salmon carcasses are carried into the woods by scavengers. So an entire ecosystem will grow stronger because the salmon are going or coming home. And I really love this because it just goes to show that just because something tragic happened and we might not ever think it's going to change or go back to the way it was, it might. And nature is incredibly resilient. Given enough time and enough help, it has an amazing ability to heal. Now we're going to venture south into Yosemite National Park. Now, as you well know, Yosemite is so famous. It's well known for its granite cliffs, giant sequoia trees, and incredible waterfalls just all over. But every year, those waterfalls also become the setting for heartbreaking tragedies. And this June, one of those tragedies actually claimed the life of a young visitor. On June 20th, emergency dispatchers began receiving reports that someone had gone into the Merced River above Nevada Falls. And within moments, the powerful current swept the person downstream and over the edge of this 594-foot waterfall. Rangers, Yosemite search and rescue personnel, and the Mariposa County Sheriff's Office immediately launched a recovery operation. And later that day, authorities recovered the victim's body below the falls. He was identified as 22-year-old Josue Alfaro, and one of the most remarkable parts of the story came from a witness named Frisia Gaul, a former volunteer lifeguard who happened to be nearby when the incident unfolded. She later explained that the water above the falls looked calm, and so that's probably why Josue entered it. In fact, to someone unfamiliar with mountain rivers, it probably looked inviting. But as most of you know, beneath the calm surface could be an incredibly powerful current. And when she realized that Alfaro was in trouble, she immediately jumped into the river and attempted to reach him. But unfortunately, she quickly discovered how strong the current really was. She described it by saying that once the current grabs you, you're fighting a mountain. She actually was nearly swept over the waterfall herself before another visitor managed to pull her to safety using a walking stick. And unfortunately, Josue disappeared over the falls before anyone could reach him. Park officials continued to investigate exactly how he entered the river. And this is not the first fatality at Nevada Falls. The National Park Service has reportedly warned visitors never to swim or wade above waterfalls, even if the water appears shallow or calm. During late spring and early summer, snowmelt drastically increases both water volume and the current speed. Now, I think that this story is incredibly sad, but it's also important. It's an important reminder because it reminds us that we can't always trust what our eyes tell us or see us. And even if water looks calm, our brains are probably telling us it's probably safe. But rivers, and especially rivers in Yosemite, they do not work that way because what looks like a safe, lazy current on the surface, you might not be seeing what's happening below. Okay, and our next nature news segment, it's not about wildlife or an accident. Instead, it has raised questions about how the United States manages and protects public lands. Because earlier this summer, law enforcement officers in Arizona arrested Mark Aaron Gatz, a man who'd been illegally living inside the Tonto National Forest for years. So when officers reached the campsite, they really could not believe what they had just found. Investigators estimated that there were roughly 1,000 pounds of garbage scattered throughout the site, like clothing, plastic containers, broken tools, metal scraps, old cookware, used motor oil, and wooden structures. Authorities also documented repeated fire violations that created an ongoing wildfire risk in the area already due to vulnerable already vulnerable area due to catastrophic fires. Not due to, but because of. According to court records, officers had contacted Gatz multiple times over the years and repeatedly instructed him to remove the camp. But instead, he ignored their instructions and the site continued to grow and grow and grow. Eventually, he pleaded guilty to violating the federal regulations related to unlawfully occupying the national forest and violating fire restrictions. Now, this story sparked quite a bit of discussion online. Like I saw it everywhere. Some people immediately viewed it as a homelessness story, others focused on the environmental damage aspect of it. But the reality is that both issues can exist at the same time. Public lands belong to everyone, They're protected not only for recreation, but also for wildlife, clean water, archaeological resources, and future generations. So, leaving behind massive amounts of trash and in doing so, creating wildlife hazards and wildfire hazards, it doesn't just affect one campsite. This has an effect on the entire ecosystem. And as outdoor enthusiasts, one of the simplest ways that we can help preserve these places is by following the leave no trace principles. Pack out what you pack in, respect closures, camp where you're allowed, and leave these places looking as though no one had ever been there. And I'm honestly shocked that it took so long to get this guy out. You would think that if the National Park Service and US Forest Service was aware, they would have removed him a long time ago before it got this bad. But again, I'm not in charge of, anything in that aspect. So, we've talked quite a bit about grizzlies today, but our next story is a reminder that black bears can also be dangerous under the right circumstance or the wrong circumstances. This spring, a woman hiking in Wyoming's Bighorn National Forest was attacked by a black bear after surprising it at a close range. She surprised it on accident. According to wildlife officials, the encounter happened in thick vegetation where visibility was limited. The hiker suddenly found herself face to face with the black bear, and the animal attacked immediately, basically. Fortunately, she survived after fighting back and receiving emergency medical treatment. Now, investigators later determined that the attack appeared to be defensive rather than predatory. She just startled him on accident and it was just reacting. Wildlife officials reminded hikers that while black bears are generally less aggressive than grizzlies, they are still powerful wild animals that are capable of inflicting life-threatening injuries. So, the advice from the National Park Service and US Forest Service remains the same. Travel in groups whenever possible, make noise, especially in dense vegetation or near running water. You should always carry bear spray where you can reach it within seconds, not inside your backpack. You need to always be staying alert for fresh tracks, scat, overturned logs, or other signs that bears are active nearby. One thing that stood out to me this summer about, how many bear encounters there were, um, spring and summer are usually the busiest months for both hikers and bears, and because people are so eager to get back on the trails after winter, and bears are doing the same thing. So sometimes those paths cross, and I think this summer I've seen more bear attacks, this spring and summer more bear attacks than I have in previous summers. Our last nature news of the day is what happened at Yellowstone with the bison. So earlier this month, there was a video that rapidly spread online, and it showed an enormous bison launching an older gentleman around 8 feet into the air. And I watched the video. It's horrifying. I'm glad that he survived, and it's shocking to watch, and if you haven't seen it, I would watch it, not because I'm like, "Oh my god, someone got attacked," but because I'm like, these people were not doing anything wrong necessarily, they weren't provoking it, they weren't approaching it. It just so happened to be in this campsite area, it was, like, rolling around in the dirt, um, and this man and his grandson were walking by, and they just stopped, snapped a picture, and kept on their way, and then the bison just attacked. I mean, you know, park officials reviewed the whole footage and they concluded that the bison had behaved naturally. It wasn't hurting anyone, it wasn't seeking people out. It simply reacted after a visitor entered its personal space. And while they were close to it, it's not like they were going up to it. But this is another reminder that if you're in a place with bison or wild animals, even if you just happen to accidentally stumble upon them at close range, you should get back. I follow the rule of thumb, if I can stick my thumb out, I'm doing it right now, and squint, and if a wildlife, if an animal is still visible beyond my thumb, I'm too close. It's not too close. I am too close. So the fact that these people are just walking by and just wanted to stop and take a photo, to me, that's not really okay. If you see a bison that close, you know you need to get back. Now, because of that, because the bison was just acting naturally, Yellowstone officials are going to say that they're not going to kill it, which I don't think they should kill it either. Now, again, this is another reminder from the National Park Service. They have continued to remind visitors to stay at least 25 yards away from bison and other large animals and 100 yards from bears and wolves. Bison may appear to be calm, but they can sprint up to 35 miles per hour and they can change direction remarkably quickly. Now, I don't know, I'm just like, oh, it's like an icky thing, right? This person got hurt, but the person also was stopping to take photos, and it wasn't really an appropriate thing to do because the bison was so close. Even though they didn't approach the bison to get that close, it's still, this is not a petting zoo. Uh, it's not a regular zoo, it's not a petting farm. The responsibility falls on us to maintain a safe distance. Every year, Yellowstone's bison injure more visitors than bears, wolves, or mountain lions. And not because bison are unusually aggressive, but because people underestimate them. They are enormous, they're fast, and they're unpredictable, and they deserve the space. So that's the end of May, June, and July nature news. Again, it's not comprehensive. These are just stories that stuck out to me. And if there's one lesson tying all of these stories together, it's that nature isn't cruel, it isn't kind, it simply is. It's just nature. So next time you head out on a trail, tell someone where you're going, carry the right gear, respect the wildlife, and pay attention to the weather. And remember that the best adventures are the ones where everyone makes it home safely. Thank you so much for listening today, and I will see you next week. As always, recreate responsibly and remember, sometimes the great outdoors aren't always great. Thanks for listening to Morbid Outdoors. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, make sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform. It's free, easy, and it helps us out immensely. When you subscribe, you get updates on our latest episodes, and it also boosts our visibility, making it easier for other curious souls to find us. Another great way to support Morbid Outdoors is by leaving us a review. Whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, a quick review helps us know what you love about the show. You can also join us on Patreon for early and ad free content. Find us on Instagram and Facebook at Morbid Outdoors Podcast. You can email us case suggestions and your campfire stories at morbidoutdoorspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for the support, and I'll see you next time.